This is Joyce Graff. I'm one of the teachers at the Brookline Senior Center, and this is our quilting class. And today we are talking about paper piecing, or it's sometimes called foundation piecing. I want to go through a few slides that I put together to help you understand the process. And what we're going to do is work with a very simple pattern. It only has these 7 pieces of fabric that we're going to put together. And the first thing, as you look at the pattern, you need to figure out which color is going to go where. So it's like paint by numbers, really. And the fabric is your paint. So some of it is going to be the foreground. I have pieces 2 and 3 marked as we're going to do something red to make it look like a heart. And then the background is the other pieces around the edges. So we're going to start with piece number 1. And what you do first is line up your fabric so that it completely covers piece number 1. Plus, we need a seam allowance. So you're going to go beyond the edges of this piece and make sure that you have a seam allowance there. So you can see how I've set it. And don't forget that
piece allowance, how much do you mean? Like
about a 1/4 of an inch. About a 1/4 of an inch. You can just eyeball it. It doesn't have to be perfect. But you just need to make sure that it's going to be strong. This seam needs to be strong and not rip through, you know, not fray. So you can see how I've set it, just a little bit in. And the other thing I want to point out is that as we look at this pattern, we're looking at the back of your finished piece. Your finished piece is actually going to be a mirror image of this, and this is so proportional it doesn't really matter. But for some things, you know, like if the bird is looking left in your pattern, it's going to be looking right in your finished piece. So you're looking at the back. And for that reason, the fabric is upside down. We're looking at the back of the fabric, the back of the pattern, and we fitted it in. You can see through it. Fran, you had a question?
Yeah, you just sort of eyeball where the 1/4 inch seam allowance is that right?
That's right.
Okay, and you just put the paper piece on top of the back of the fabric?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, thank you. Yep.
Okay, and then when
it's almost like tracing, right?
Very much
like tracing on paper.
That's right. And you'll see it comes together. It's really cute. So the next seam we're going to do is between piece 1 and piece 2. So I've set the fabric so that the right sides of the fabric are together. Remember, this one's upside down, that one's right side up. The right sides of the fabric are together, and they come together right here, about a 1/4 of an inch in from this. This is going to be our sewing line.
So I have another question, Joyce. I'm sorry about that.
No problem.
We put the paper number 1 on top of the back of the fabric, the other fabric, not the fabric you have showing right now. And now what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to put the color of the actual heart on top of that? I don't quite get it. Right.
So if the red piece we want to be here, this is for piece number 2, right? That's where it's ultimately going. In order to get it there, we need to make a seam here and then pass this fabric back to the other side. So this pattern is the back of the work. This piece we put on with the back of the fabric toward the pattern. So again, this is the back, this is the back. So the front of this piece number 1 is actually down toward the new piece number 2. You see what I mean? So the right sides of those fabrics are together, and your seam is going to be right here.
So what happened to the other fabric?
What other fabric? It's right here. Do you see it in the picture? This is the piece 1 that we put in before.
Oh, so you already cut that part out?
I just trimmed it along that line because we're not going to need all that bulk, and it's just kind of in the way now. But one of the things I learned is don't cut the fabric too early, because sometimes you'll cut it at the wrong angle. So yeah, I just try, you'll see, I'm going to show you how to line it up. So we're going to put a pin right along that line as if it were the seam. And then I turn the piece out to make sure it's going to cover piece number 2, because if the angle's wrong, you know, sometimes the fabric will be at the wrong angle. So we're going to turn that out. I'll show you. So now I've turned it out. It's the same 2 pieces of fabric, but now I've turned it right to make sure I can cover piece number 2, which I can. So that's good. So now I'm going to put it back in sewing position and sew that seam instead of just the pin. That make sense?
No.
So I'll show you one more time. So this is the try. We're just going to put a pin here, and then I've taken this red fabric and flipped it over to cover 2. Here it is flipped out to check it. And now we've sewn the seam, and this is what it looks like. Here's your piece number 1 and piece number 2. This is the front of the piece. Doesn't look like much yet, but this is the front of it. And then I do what's called finger pressing. You just press along that seam line to crisp up the seam a little bit. And then once we've done that, now we can trim it. But notice that when I've trimmed this new red number 2 piece, I've made it pretty generous on all sides. It doesn't have to be trimmed really tightly yet. We'll do that later. But right now we just want to get the bulk of that extra fabric out of the way. Okay. So just trimmed it down a little bit, and I pinned it in place. So piece 1, piece 2, and now here's our piece 3. So we're going to sew this seam line next. And notice that this seam line, whoops, sorry. This seam line is going to go across piece 1 and across piece 2 and be all the way down there.
So it's connected on two sides then?
We're going to draw this seam line. But see how it starts down here on piece 1.
Yeah.
It doesn't just go between 2 and 3. It's going to be that whole line. So we're assembling little bits. Okay. The other thing I wanted to point out here is that your seam line should go about 2 stitches beyond the end of this line. And that's, again, to make it a good, strong fastening so it won't pull out. It should go at least 2 stitches beyond the line. So this is our new seam line, and we're going to line up a new piece. So how are we going to get that in the right place? So again, right sides together. And we're going to set it along this line. And one of the things I do to set it is you can stick a pin right here at this crossing and another pin right there, and use those 2 points to align the edge of the new piece of fabric. So here's a new piece of fabric coming on, and it's right sides together. So the right side is up against the right sides of what's fastened already to the back of your pattern. Okay, and that's going to be our sewing line. So we pin it and turn it out to make sure that it's going to cover. And you can see, if you can see through the fabric, this piece of fabric is sort of L-shaped, and it just went far enough beyond that line. So that's why I checked. Always say, because if that had been a little short, I would have had to take it out and do it over again. Okay, so this is to check it and make sure I don't have to do it twice. Now turn it back, pin it to sew, and sew this line. And again, you're going to go at least 2 stitches beyond the end of this line. But in this case, we're at the very end of the block. So I would go ahead and sew all the way to the end of the block. So here, this block, which we're going to put into a bigger piece, needs 1/4 inch here to be its seam allowance. So you sew all the way to the edge. Questions?
When do you do this kind of piecing?
When do you do the what?
This kind of piecing?
Whenever I want to make a paper pieced element. So,
Okay.
yeah, in this case, we're working with this design, but I've done a lot of birds and animals. My favorite thing to do is to do paper pieced animals. And my favorite designer is Margaret Rolfe, R-O-L-F-E. She's from Australia. And I've done tons of her animals. Done baby quilts with animals in them. There's one that's currently hanging in the senior center that is Australian animals. So her husband's a zoologist. So her animals look like animals. They don't look like cartoon characters. They look like animals. And so that's why I like her stuff. Anyway, so here we're doing this seam. And now I turn back the paper so that I can see this seam, okay? And it's a little raggedy. You do not want to cut the paper. Just remember, you do not want to cut the paper. So you want to just trim this seam and make it nice and neat like that. Okay, it sort of makes it less bulky and it'll be neater under your piece. So now if we turn it over and we can see the front, this is piece 1, piece 2, piece 3, it's beginning to take some shape. And now we're going to set the next piece. And here you can see I'm doing with those pins that I told you about. Just stick a pin at the intersection at the end of your piece. And that gives you something to look at on the back side as you're setting the new piece of fabric. So I had the pins. I know where those pins are in the front. And I can see them coming through. And I'll use those to set this new piece of fabric so that I'm 1/4 inch from the end. From the edges so that I have a good seam allowance in there, and I'm just using them to set. So I never actually put the pin in a second time. I just use it as a guide for setting the piece. Then repin it to sew, and I wanted to show you this. You see I've got the pin going in here and out through the paper, which sounds a little weird. It's kind of hanging from my pins. But that's fine. It's going to help me keep things together as I sew that line. And again, I'm going to sew from here all the way over to here so that I have my seams completely sewn out. Just make sure you've gone at least the 2 stitches beyond. If you forget to do the rest, that's not a problem. You'll see as you work with it. But now I've sewn the seam, and then I'll trim it. So fold back the paper, trim it like that, so that now we have a neater seam. And the piece is beginning to look like something. So you're just building it up. We're painting by numbers. And now the next couple of pieces, it's the exact same idea. This, just like we did with this little bit. Now we have a bigger triangle, but it's exactly the same process. I use my pins to set it. Right sides of the fabric together. You can see from the back that I'm putting this in the right place. And I'm going to sew it all the way to the end here for my seam allowance. Okay. Fold it back, trim it, and fold it out. and I'm finger pressing. Instead of using an iron, it's actually better to do it with finger pressing until you get your piece done. So here we've got it looking a little like a heart, but it's still a little bit boxy, right? We can still see them as rectangles. We really would like it to be more curved. So how do we do that? So the first thing to do is, while you still have your pattern on here, I've set to 1/4 of an inch, and I'm going to use my rotary cutter to just trim right across there from here to here. So the whole piece will be, here's my piece in here. Can you see through the ruler? That's where the piece is. This is your edge line on your pattern. And I set this ruler so that I have a 1/4 inch seam beyond the piece. And now we have a perfect patch. So now we know it's exactly, this is the pattern plus our 1/4 of an inch seam. Okay. And here you see it from the front. So now we need to take out the paper. And what you do is just fold the paper back, and it's just like, you know, if you were trying to tear a piece of paper in half, you fold it back and forth to weaken that edge, and then you can just pull it. And here we have the additional help of this perforation. As we sewn it, made all these little holes that essentially perforated the paper. So we're folding it back and then ripping it off, and you just do the best you can with that. I start on the edges and work my way in, removing it one piece at a time. As you get it toward the center, some of them get a little stubborn, and so maybe I'll put a finger under here or even a seam ripper or something like that to help me get this piece of paper out. The inside pieces are a little trickier. And there it is with the border, and you see how that softened that curve. So until you get the border on, you don't really get the full feel of it, but that's why I put the border on, so you can see the difference. Okay. So if you want to try something even more challenging, you've got your 4-inch hearts there, which have a lot more pieces. You can see they've got 10 pieces instead of
11.
Okay. And then you'd figure out what colors you want to use. Maybe you have 1, 2, 3 shades of red here, and you could have 1 and 8 be the same one, and 2 and 7 be the same one, or not. It's entirely up to you. Let your creativity flow. But 11 and 10 and 5, 4, and 9 are your background, right? And then you design however you want this to be. Put something floral in there, whatever. Okay. Now, what do you notice about this piece as opposed to the 3-inch heart?
Much more
This is more
complicated.
at an angle. This piece is
sorry?
more at an angle.
It's more of an angle. Okay.
That's
Anything
the
else?
way I see it.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else you notice?
More
There's more
complicated.
pieces. So picture yourself taking the paper out on this.
Yeah.
Not fun. So the more pieces there are, the more annoying the paper becomes. So, and I've done 4-inch animals, you know, I'll do a whole tiger or something like that within a 4-inch space. So you get a lot of little pieces. And so here's some ideas. These are some patterns that I saw on the internet. You get an idea of the kind of thing you can do with paper piecing. But notice how many.
They're adorable.
Aren't they adorable? I love them. So here's this cute one. Here's a giraffe. Millicent is looking for making a giraffe. And look at this bee. I thought about giving you the bee pattern, but look at the number of pieces here.
That looks
It's
very
complicated assembly. And a little embroidery for the antennae and so forth. So the more pieces you have, the more annoying the paper becomes. So I said, I don't want to take out the bloody paper. The other thing that I don't like about that is as you rip the paper, you can weaken the seam. So the smaller the piece, here's some of Margaret Roth's animals.
Oh, yeah, I love the
Cat,
elephant.
elephant. They're adorable. I think they're wonderful. You see
I
the
agree.
toucan? So they're great animals. But it's like, I really don't want to be bothered with the bloody paper. So I'll show you what I do. Here's another complicated design. You can see these bitty little pieces. Lovely. And when you're doing something this complex, you do it in segments. So you'd piece the A, and then you'd piece the B, and you'd have a seam allowance in here. And then you put those two pieces together. And then you do C, like a separate piece, and you add that to A. See what I'm doing? So you build it up in multiple segments. So what I came down to doing is, and I've done both of these methods a lot. I like them both. They have pros and cons, but you can decide what you like the best. One is to use lightweight, fusible interfacing and just leave it in. So I use the lightest fusible interfacing I can find. And I did my 4-inch animals for the baby quilts with fusible. And then as you put the pieces together, you can even press them down because it's fusing it to whatever you're doing. The other one, and this is the method I used for the Australian animals that are hanging at the senior center now. I used a water-soluble stabilizer. And then once you get your piece put together, you wash it and it dissolves. So the piece that I sent you, that's water-soluble interfacing. You can draw on it and then you make your piece. And then once you get the piece together, don't do it before, then you can wash it. I just go and run it under the faucet in the bathroom and it turns sort of gooey. You just get all that off of it and then hang it up over the towel bar and let it dry overnight and then iron it the next day. But just don't press it when you're working with it because it'll burn it.
Oh,
And it'll shrink and it changes its shape. So don't press it with an iron, but wash it away. So that's my preference. You can do foundation piecing, but without having to take the silly paper out. But the paper that I sent you is a special paper that's designed for this purpose, and it's relatively easy to
the trace.
Yeah. Question? So I've been thinking, we've had some correspondence about making a community quilt. And in this case, each person does just one of these little houses or whatever. And then you assemble them into a larger quilt. And we could have something that we could sell for benefit of the senior center. And so I put together this design. And we'll see if you like it. But I was thinking each person could choose the square that they like the best. This is the simplest one. It only has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces. And so that's the easiest one. And this is one of the more complex ones. So this deer with his little antlers, you can see it's got itty bitty little pieces in it. So this is more complicated, but you can choose that or anything in between. The trees are pretty easy to do, okay? And each person makes one, and then we can decorate them. So you could embroider on it, you could do some applique, you could put a window box with some flowers in it, or there's some curtains on this window, let your creativity flow. So we have I think he's a bear. I'm not sure. A bear and this one.
Yeah,
What?
it's a bear.
It's a bear. Yeah. All right. And so what do you think? Do you think that might be fun?
There.
Do one. Just choose one square. And here I've got one with one window. This has 2 windows, and then decorate it. Put whatever decorations you want, doorknob, chimney, curtains, flowers, whatever. And if we each make one or more you're inspired, and put it together, we can make a bigger quilt. So this is paper piecing foundation, or foundation piecing, I should say. So foundation piecing for the start, and then embroidery, applique, whatever turns you on to do your decorations.
Ooh.
We're all thinking.
Paper
Fine.
piecing 101 sounds like paper piecing 10010.
It's all apparent to me, Joyce. You gotta get the pieces in the right place.
Joyce,
Yes.
this is Janet. Do we all have to do it this with the paper, or do we all have to do it with the wash away stabilizer? Would it make any difference if somebody did it?
No, it wouldn't make any difference at all. You could choose your favorite method. And I have
Okay.
some supplies I can help with too. So I'm thinking if we each make a 10-inch square, and then we can assemble them. All right.
Okay.
Okay.
And when do we start this project?
We can start it whenever you wish, as far as that goes.
I'll do a house,
Great.
10 inches, right?
Yeah, I'll send you all a pattern now that I have your addresses. But you can tell me what sort of challenge level you want. One
I
window or
think
two,
I think I make
or if you want an
kindergarten.
animal. What?
Kindergarten level.
Yeah, me too.
Pre-K.
Kindergarten level for me too.
Pre-K.
Oh, Nick, you're gonna do one?
Nursery school.
I don't
Just
know.
one tree.
I
one
got
tree
it.
is
I've
good
been
for-
working on this one quilt that I got to get more done with it before I have surgery.
Yeah, my
Oh, that'll be
favorite.
great. Thanks.